Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. EU leaders are meeting in Brussels to decide whether frozen Russian assets confront Ukraine as US-Russia talks loom. Turning Point USA gathers in Arizona for the first big conference since Charlie Kirk's assassination. And Bank of England cuts interest rates, easing costs for borrowers. Now, EU leaders are gathering in Brussels for a make-or-break summit over whether to use frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. Ukraine is now facing a foreign aid shortfall of about 50 billion euros next year, with President Zelenskyy warning today that drone production could be cut if the first loan tranche isn't received by spring. Both Russian and Ukrainian officials are heading to the US this weekend to discuss Trump's peace plan. For more on this, I'm joined by Ukrainian MP Rudik. Kira, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. One of the biggest hurdles is the frozen Russian money in Belgian bank accounts. How will European leaders get around accessing these sovereign funds, which are protected by international law?
Hello, Leigh-Ann, and thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back on the show. Of course, there are two sides of the story. The first point is a legal side of using Russian assets for the sake of Ukraine, for the sake of Europe. And second is a political side. And so, as for the legal side, our European partners have already found a way to use these money as the collateral for a loan to Ukraine that Ukraine will not have to pay back until Russia will pay the reparations for everything that they have destroyed. So it's basically Russia would either have to forfeit their frozen assets in Europe or will have to pay for the destructions that have happened in Ukraine because of Russia. And so right now what was missing was a political decision to go ahead and have a vote on using this for additional loans. I believe we need about 90 billion euros as of right now to have a forecast for the next 2 years that our main expenses will be covered. And so we can continue fighting against Russia. We can continue existing as a state without a threat that international support will be disrupted.
And Kira, Russia's central bank says it will sue European banks over frozen assets. So Putin is clearly watching to see if this summit fails. Will this play right into Moscow's hands if a divided Europe fails to reach an agreement to fund Ukraine? Like you said, around 90 billion euros is needed.
Of course, we are all watching closely. And I would say that the tensions are very similar to last year when we were watching how the Congress would vote to support the aid for Ukraine. So, of course, it's critical. And we hope that European leaders today will find strength and find wisdom in their hearts to go ahead and do this, to send strong signal to Moscow, to send strong signal to Ukraine, but also understand that that will be investment, first of all, in European security. Because what we have seen that the delays of the decision about these assets, and we are talking about 200 billion euros in Belgium right now. So the delays in the political decision have opened ideas, for example, for President Trump and his administration to have a very different usage. For example, in 28-point plan, we have seen that Russia and the United States will use the assets for their purposes, including United States receiving 50% of interest on those assets. So Europe realized at some point that they may stop being an object in the negotiations, so being subject in the negotiation and become object. And so they need to make the decisions because otherwise other big players will try to make the decisions for them.
And Ukraine is forecast to run out of money by spring next year. How concerning is this for military personnel on the front lines and also civil servants, Kira, who need to receive a living wage to be able to keep on surviving and to keep on fighting for Ukraine? How desperate is the situation right now?
Of course, situation is critical, but this is not the first time when it was critical for us. In 2022, when Russia first attacked us, we were not particularly ready for the expenses of the size of the war. We were not ready to keep our state going on. However, right now we figured out how to use the support of our partners in a distributed way so that situation can be more stable. Leigh-Ann, situation is indeed very dire, but it is dire not because our partners did something wrong, but because Russia continues attacking us. They almost destroyed our energy infrastructure. For example, right now when we are speaking, I'm using diesel generator to provide the lights and internet. Otherwise, my home will be in complete darkness. And this is the reality of how Ukraine lives today. So we are going through a lot of struggles. However, we believe that we wouldn't get to this worst point. We will not have funds to pay our military, or we will not have the funds to pay our state workers. We hope that we will figure it out. And of course, this is why today is such a critical day.
And I also just want to put some of the arguments that are coming from the US in some respects, Kira. They're saying right now, if Europe gives Ukraine this money, which is frozen Russian assets, which is obviously secured by international law, that will mean that Ukraine can keep on fighting on. But we know the US is desperate to reach an agreement. They're desperate for a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Do you think that more pressure is being put on Zelenskyy right now in order to give in and possibly agree to the 28-point plan that was presented?
So let me address your questions one by one. The first is, it's very interesting how Russia has committed all kinds of the war crimes, have broken all kinds of the international laws, for example, of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, all the agreements and ceasefires that we have since 2014. Right now, they are appealing to international laws when it is about their money. So they do not care, and they close their eyes on killing children and women every single day here in Ukraine, attacking kindergartens and hospitals. And when it comes to money, they, for some point, become such law-obedient entities that they say, oh, well, but everybody else needs to conduct according to the international laws. Well, no, it should not apply to the aggressor who has broken all kinds of laws. As for the United States pressuring Ukraine to make a deal, we would like to see United States, first of all, to put pressure on Russia, because Russia is an aggressor. And the problem about ending the war was never on Ukraine's side. I think President Zelenskyy was trying to get the deal very much from our side. However, President Trump and the American administration, including the partners in Europe, were not able to get Russia to a first step, which is a ceasefire. You cannot have negotiations under the fire, under the constant bombardment, because it just doesn't make any sense. So right now, I have a question. Does this honestly, any sort of deal, does it have a future if no of the partners are able to pressure Russia to anything or to agree with Russia and to anything? And how do we make sure that 15-point plan will be accepted by Russia if right now they're not agreeing basically to anything?
Kira, Rudik, as always, thank you so much for joining me. Stay safe, and it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Let's continue this conversation with Jim Townsend, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO Policy, and he joins me from Washington, D.C. So, Jim, I was just talking to Kira Rudik, a Ukrainian MP, a little bit earlier. But can you set the scene for everyone right now watching how crucial this summit is, not just for Ukraine, but also for Europe?
And for the United States as well. This summit does a lot of things. One is it's going to signal just how deep the European Union and the European nations are in this idea of supporting Ukraine. How hard are they going to work to try to find the legal ways to get around problems that the Belgians have and others might have in terms of using these assets as collateral, or whatever usage of these assets. This is something that is going to call for a lot of commitment and hard work on Europe. And is Europe really in it? Are they in it to win it, as we say? And so we're going to find out today that this is going to be a great signal to everyone, including Putin, how serious the Ukraine is. And so that's going to be important. It'll be important to the United States as well. This is where Trump is going to look at how serious Europe is too. Are they going to really be a strong partner in this? Or are they going to be weak and they're not going to be able to come up with any approach on the assets? And what does that mean about a commitment to provide military assets over time? Is there going to be that similar kind of weakness there also? And so certainly for the Ukrainians, who are really looking on the Europeans as a very strong partner, probably stronger than the United States in a lot of ways. Yeah. Ukraine, as we just heard from Kira, Ukraine desperately needs this assistance in the years to come. And if Europe cannot come up with it and can't come up with a workaround, if they can't use the assets, what does this mean for Ukraine during this dark winter time? So this is going to be a very important meeting just to signal the European role as a player in this drama.
And as you said to me, also be a signal to Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. And we've seen Donald Trump come out previously, haven't we, Jim, and says the EU just has a lot of meetings about meetings, but they're not actually doing enough. Let's concentrate a little bit on Vladimir Putin here, because he's threatening sanctions if this happens. Also, the Russian argument is billions of dollars of Western European assets are held in Russia at the moment. So if the EU does this, Russia is going to retaliate and freeze those assets that they have in their banks, which belong to Western companies. So I guess if the EU doesn't make a decision and they come out divided, this is playing right into Moscow's hands.
Well, I think what's really playing into his hands is the fact that they're split and they can't make a decision. Then that, like we were saying earlier, that signal is what Russia would really love to see, because he'll turn to Ukraine and say, you have no friends. Mm-hmm. Even Europe cannot come together in a unified way to support you, Ukraine. And the Americans, of course, are playing fast and loose in a lot of ways within the negotiations. And so this will be part of the propaganda game for Putin to really sow among Ukrainian and European supporters and the Americans, saying, look, to all of you, look what Europe cannot do. And also I think it's going to be some scare tactics for Putin as well. You mentioned the sanctions that he's going to retaliate with on Americans as well as on the Europeans, probably. How serious this is, what kind of impact this will have, we'll have to see. But really, I haven't really heard these kinds of threats coming out of the Kremlin until recently. So I guess Putin is a little bit worried, but he's certainly got, he believes, some leverage as well on the assets that he's holding.
Yeah, really interesting, because Kira said the same thing, didn't she? She said when it comes to money, the Kremlin is clearly rattled in many ways. But I want to talk to you a little bit about something you touched on there, but bubbling close to the surface of the EU's discussions that we're seeing today, and we're talking about, Jim, are these US efforts to forge a deal to end the war. Zelenskyy actually came out today. He gave a speech a little bit before, and he was saying that he's counting on pressure from the US. Do you think President Donald Trump is going to put any further pressure on the Kremlin?
Well, that's the question everyone is asking. And I hate to say it, but we really don't know, because Trump can just suddenly send out a tweet and there's pressure of some type. So I don't think we really know. I think that certainly Trump is getting to a point now where, as we've been saying for a long time, that he's aware that Putin is playing him. He's being criticized for being too weak with Russia. He's also getting frustrated with how slow these negotiations are going. It could be that he's at the end of his patience and he will do something like sanctions, even though that might impact negatively on the U.S. economy too. Secondary sanctions on China, India will certainly impact the United States too, at a time when the economy is suddenly a political issue. So he's going to be a little cautious about that. You know, maybe the tomahawks are going to come back into play. Maybe he's going to say, look, I'm going to start supplying these tomahawks because you're not being serious. But at the end of the day, it all depends on Putin and how he feels any pain from sanctions. He might sit back and say, look, Trump, go ahead, send tomahawks, go ahead and send additional sanctions on our energy sector, whatever it might be. It doesn't pain me enough to stop what I'm doing in Ukraine. It doesn't pain me enough to go to the table. So really, at the end of the day, it's up to Putin. If Trump puts sanctions on him and Putin says he laughs at them, then there you go. Even sanctions at this point can't force Putin to the table.
And Jim, just before I let you go, I want to ask you a really quick question. We are running out of time, but I actually found it really interesting because Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk was speaking today, and I found what he said quite telling. He says EU leaders must decide either money today or blood tomorrow. What do you make of those comments coming from Donald Tusk today?
Well, he's right, and that's a good point to end the discussion on, and that is if Ukraine is not given what it needs to hold the line and to push back on Putin, and instead they are forced to capitulate, to make a bad deal, then that's where the assistance was not there for Ukraine, and that caused Putin to think that now that I'm done with Ukraine, it's on to the West, it's on to Poland, and that's what Donald Tusk is warning about.
Yeah, really interesting conversation, Jim Townsend. As always, thank you so much for your analysis.
Thank you.
Now, Turning Point USA kicks off its first big conference since the assassination of founder Charlie Kirk. Thousands are expected in Phoenix, with MAGA figures, Christian leaders, and Kirk's widow, Erika, taking the stage following her high-profile meeting with Candace Owens aimed at easing tensions over conspiracy claims. Take a listen to what Owens had to say following the meeting between the two yesterday.
The amount of people who attacked me for sending out a tweet being like, hey, I'm good, I'm alive. We had a very productive conversation. And they were like, she got the call. She got the call. She's betrayed us. She's doing something else. I can't believe it. This has all just been a show. Calm down, okay? What do you think happened? Well, Erika said, stop. And then I was frozen for 4 hours and 30 minutes, just like... sort of like, hey, I felt name checked by the podcaster Candace Owens, this obvious setup, and then asking me to stop. And it's interesting to hear Erika say that the reason she didn't ask me to stop in the beginning because she was actually learning things from the show. She was actually learning things, and that I think she similarly felt that Bari Weiss was trying to create a moment. Obviously, it's who Bari Weiss is. It's the Zionist lobby.
For more on this, I'm joined by spokesperson for Republican Overseas, Erol Morkoc. Erol, as always, thank you so much for joining me. I just want to start with Erika Kirk and Candace Owens. So they sat down and spoke for over 4 hours yesterday. What did you make of the meeting and the timing of this get-together just a day before the Turning Point USA conference?
Well, the timing, I think, is what really speaks to me as a former member, as a student member of Turning Point, and somebody who went to Charlie's vigil there. The one absence from my time in the organization, tangentially, and also at the funeral memorial, was Candace Owens. Obviously, she has gone down her own wavelength here, and this is not something that I'm endorsing, but rather just observing. And it's interesting to see Erika Kirk's timing in bringing Candace somewhat back into the fold of Turning Point, at least in a allowable way. I think for most people who aren't heavily invested in the story, they are curious why Erika Kirk wasn't responding to all these kind of very, let's say, avant-garde things Candace Owens was saying. So I think this meeting has sort of given Candace Owens some legitimacy to continue going on. And it also could be a way to build bridges, because I think also everybody's forgetting here that that is a friend of hers who was murdered. And so, you know, Erika Kirk lost her husband, Candace Owens lost her friend. People who are grieving do bizarre things. The fact that they sat down for 4.5 hours, that's quite a lot of time. What the result of that will be, what that will mean for Turning Point USA and Candace Owens going forward, I can't speak on that. But as a cultural observation, it certainly gives some legitimacy to Candace Owens that was not there prior.
So following that meeting and speaking, the Turning Point USA lawyer spoke to Candace Owens, and Candace Owens said after that meeting she still doesn't feel like Tyler Robinson shot Charlie Kirk. As you said to me, Charlie Kirk was one of her closest friends. You know Charlie Kirk. You worked at Turning Point USA. What do you make of these allegations, and how damaging have they been for Turning Point USA?
Well, they've been very damaging in the sense that this is an organization of good people, God-fearing Christians, and the implication that anybody internally in that organization has been involved in the murder of Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is the reason why I'm married to my fiance. We met at a Turning Point USA event. I mean, Charlie Kirk is somebody who everybody around him loved. So the idea that he was surrounded by a Judas Iscariot type figure is something that is hard to reconcile without any proof. And I think that's the sort of the elephant in the room here is, where is the proof that this has happened? And is people's negligence proof of willful negligence? You know, oftentimes we can attribute to malice what can often be attributed to apathy. And I think that's one of the sort of ways to look through it here. Now, Turning Point is a multi-$100 million organization. This is an organization that realized that the young people still have a voice, and you know, political change comes a lot slower than social change. So this is an adaptable, aggressive, and pragmatic group of people, and it's quite a big tent. And so I think while it's been a setback socially, it also is important to note that they didn't back away from the discussion. Charlie never backed away from controversy. He never backed away from you know, putting his opinion out there. And if they were wrong about something, they would correct themselves. So it does seem on brand, though, that they have kept the dialogue going. And as Candace hasn't given up, I mean, Erika is the CEO and head of that organization, and her word is final on this. So when Erika Kirk goes and does this, I think it's also patching up the brand to some degree, because you don't want people who love Charlie Kirk to feel like the organization he built hates him or them. And so I think the only thing we can have here is more reconciliation, and maybe if there's some proof of what Candace Owens is saying. And I'm not talking about the conspiracy and with some of these Egyptian airplanes and what she said about anti-Semitic things that I fully disavow completely. But if she can, in some ways, prove that maybe there was some internal situation, I think that that's maybe the best that can come from it. But certainly it hasn't helped the brand. But I think it's such a traumatic time that nothing at all could have done worse than watching Charlie die on television.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said there, that was Charlie Kirk's brand. He spoke to everyone about everything. And of course, you know, wanted to go to college campuses and debate the difficult topics. But Erol, let's turn to this evening's events that will be happening. It's going to be a star-studded night with President Donald Trump in attendance, J.D. Vance. And you knew Charlie Kirk. What message will they be trying to send out tonight to the world about Charlie himself, about the organization?
I think they're going to try to toe the line with Charlie's deep Christian belief. Charlie always wanted to be remembered above all else for his faith. He was an unapologetic Christian and somebody who put his faith at the center of who he was. And Erika Kirk came out and forgave the alleged killer, Tyler Robinson. I think the killer, but according to the documents alleged still, Tyler Robinson. So maybe there will be some of that, but Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and a lot of us, we don't have that same kind of unlimited forgiveness that they do. So I would expect this to be a rallying cry to show the American people that they've killed the nice Christian kid who went and talked to the people. So now the question is, do we still keep pushing the free speech message? Let's all talk about it. Not that we're going to be anti-free speech, but do we really care about dialogue anymore when we're giving one side of our dialogue? And just this last week at Brown University, this woman who is the head of the conservative group, young, beautiful woman, was killed, most likely for her political beliefs. And so as this rhetoric ramps up, I think this might be a metaphorical call to defense for young conservatives. Like, hey, this is not a time to be complacent. This is a time for us to, circle the wagons. Our people are under attack, and we have the momentum now. The youth is coming with us. Gen Z is coming with us. There's no need to back down from this. We're a party of diverse individuals. I'm an immigrant to the United States of America. There's everybody welcome at Turning Point. Turning Point is the most egalitarian and welcoming organization I've ever been in. And just for your viewers to know, as on the inside, it's like 25% just policy nerds and like 80% really normal people. That was the coolest thing about Turning Point. It wasn't a bunch of far-right individuals. It was just normal people who finally got together and didn't have to share each other's pronouns. I didn't have to say, I'm Erol, he, him. I could just say, hey, I'm Erol. And nobody asked me where I came from or how I was being oppressed or whatnot. And it was just a group of cool people. So that's another thing to point out. It's a bunch of normal, cool people who are going there, and then some guys who are just like too young to be into policy, but really are. And that's cool too. And if they come, it's a good time. So I think President Trump being there, all of the, head honchos of the administration being there, that gives the weight, that gives the gravity, that gives the respect that Charlie Kirk definitely deserves on this monumental memorial of the organization he has built that now will transgress what he has done and will become even bigger under Erika Kirk's leadership.
Erol, it's always great to speak to you, and I always love the story that you tell me that Charlie Kirk introduced you to your wife. So that's such a nice thought. And as always, Erol Morkoc, it's brilliant to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Australia is vowing to crack down on hate speech following the deadly shooting at Sydney's Bondi Beach. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says new laws will target those who spread hate, division and radicalisation. The measures also gave authorities new powers to cancel or refuse visas linked to hate speech. The US Congress has permanently ended sanctions on Syria. The Senate passed the repeal for the 2019 CSA Act as part of an annual defense package. Supporters say the move could pave the way for investment and reconstruction in the war-torn country. Ghislaine Maxwell has asked a US federal court to vacate or reduce her 20-year prison sentence. Convicted in 2021 for sex trafficking linked to Jeffrey Epstein, Maxwell argues she did not receive a fair trial, citing what she says is new evidence. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is looking to secure a free trade agreement with Oman after arriving in the country on Wednesday. It's the final leg of Mr. Modi's three-stop trip as India looks to expand its trade partners in the region. Chris Gilbert reports.
A guard of honor met Narendra Modi when he touched down in Muscat on Wednesday. He was welcomed by Oman's Deputy Prime Minister for Defense, but his mission is trade. The Indian leader is on a diplomacy blitz as Delhi looks to pivot its trade strategy following the US implementing harsh tariffs earlier this year. Oman is the third largest market for Indian exporters, so Delhi is looking to lock in a free trade agreement 2 years in the making. It may lower or eliminate tariffs for key sectors like India's textile industry, which makes up 13% of exports and has been stung by a 50% US tariff. Muscat is the last leg of Modi's three-stop tour promoting India as a trustworthy supply partner. On Tuesday, he met the King of Jordan to discuss cooperation on infrastructure pharmaceuticals, and economic security.
Today's discussions mark an important step for our two nations to advance our shared economic priorities with opportunities to expand into new horizons for cooperation.
And on Wednesday, it was Ethiopia, where he promoted India as an economic leader and partner of like-minded Global South countries.
We will also enhance our trade and investment cooperation as well as on defense and security matters. As developing countries, we have a lot to learn from and offer to each other.
Earlier this month, he also welcomed Russian President Vladimir Putin in Delhi for trade talks, but experts say Oman is a key business partner. It's a vital source of gas and minerals for Delhi. Trade between the two countries was more than $10 billion last year. Mr. Modi is set to discuss this with Sultan Haitham bin Tariq and meet with a gathering of the Indian diaspora in Muscat. Chris Gilbert, Arabiya English.
Now, the Bank of England has cut interest rates from 4% to 3.75%. It's 6 reductions since last summer, following a bigger than expected fall in inflation yesterday. The move could immediately lower monthly mortgage repayments. The bank, however, has warned that economic growth does indeed remain weak. For more on this, I'm joined from London by Arabiya senior correspondent and presenter Carina Kamel. Carina, always good to have you on the show. So,
good evening, Leigh-Ann.
Hiya. So why will this interest rate cut bring early Christmas cheer for millions of Brits?
Well, you could even say that Christmas came early yesterday when the CPI data or inflation figures showed the prices dropping from 3.6 to 3.2%. This was a lot less than expected. It was welcomed by British consumers who've been squeezed by higher inflation. It's been welcomed by anybody thinking about buying a home. And it's definitely been welcomed by the government after a series of negative data points and obviously the budget, which was also highly controversial. It is definitely a early Christmas present for anybody thinking of getting a mortgage in the near future, because interest rates currently have been dropped to 3.75%. That's less than the 4% that they were at just yesterday, and it makes buying a home essentially easier in the UK. The problem is that going forward, there had been hopes that maybe interest rates would be cut perhaps twice, maybe even 3 times over the course of 2026. But based on what we've heard today from the statement coming out of the Bank of England and comments just in the last little while from Andrew Bailey, the governor of the bank, it looks like interest rates won't be on a downward path in a very quick way. So essentially any rate cuts, as stated in the statement coming out from the bank, are going to be very gradual. And after what we heard today, markets have actually pared down their expectations for how many cuts we should see. So yes, interest rates are lower than they were, but they're not necessarily going to go a lot lower. So we're unlikely to get to that 3%. We might see 1 cut, maybe at most 2 cuts. Currently, markets are pricing in the next cut for 26 in June. Before this meeting, markets had expected the cut to be maybe in April. So that's perhaps a longer timeline with this rate at 3.75%. So shall we say qualified good news for those looking to purchase a home?
Yeah, qualified good news, because I've got to remortgage my house actually next year. So I was watching that interest rate closely today, Carina.
Amongst hundreds of thousands of others who are watching that figure, yeah.
I know, exactly, because loads of us had a fixed mortgage, so now we're moving into that position. But my big question is, okay, we've had lower inflation, which was a surprise yesterday, as you say, early Christmas present. We had a cut today, but why is there still uncertainty when it comes to the UK economy? Like I said, despite this positivity that we are getting.
Well, where to begin? We have had a slew of negative news over the past year. Firstly, on the economic front, certainly economic growth has been lower than expected. The latest figures for October on a monthly basis showed growth or GDP actually contracting by 0.1%. Expectations had been for a very slight growth of 0.1%. The economy the previous month also only grew by 0.1%. So weaker than expected economy. Again, inflation is still, even at 3.2%, it's a lot higher than the 2% targeted. We've heard some news from Andrew Bailey, who said that he now expects inflation to reach its target by April or May next year. So that's earlier than he had initially thought. So that's somewhat good as well. But on the other hand, we talk about wages. So services inflation, the cost of services in this country because of labor shortages are very high. People, because they've been expecting inflation to be high, have been demanding higher wages from their employers. The government has reached a number of settlements with labor unions. We're speaking as the doctors, the resident doctors, formerly known as junior doctors, are engaging in strike action, demanding even higher pay, even though they've received a higher pay packet from the government. So public sector pay packages, all of that has pushed wages much higher, and wages are one of the factors that lead to higher inflation. So all of that creates a picture of uncertainty. If the government gives in to renewed demand from the labor unions and increases wages again, we could see inflation head back up again. We also have uncertainty on the geopolitical front that's impacting the United Kingdom, external factors like the cost of energy. And last but certainly not least is the political situation. We have local elections coming up in May of next year, and the outlook is not great. Reform is looking to make massive gains across the country if predictions are correct. Opinion polls are showing Reform leading Labour in some opinion polls, certainly in certain areas. And we've talked a lot about perhaps leadership challenges to Keir Starmer, head of the Labour Party, Prime Minister of the UK. So all of that adds a lot of political uncertainty into the mix. And just finally, let's just remember also that a lot of the measures that were announced in the budget on the 26th of November don't come in till April of 26, including some tax hikes, although most of the tax hikes have been delayed even longer. But once some of the measures do come into effect, that also adds a lot of uncertainty because it's unclear what the impact will be on the economy. So a lot of issues going on, and that creates a very uncertain picture. But what we have heard from the bank is that as far as interest rates are concerned, they're on a very gradual path downward.
Yeah, Carina, lots of complex issues, like you said, a very backloaded budget. But I just want to move on and speak to you about tech stocks, because actually they were gaining some ground after the declines we saw yesterday. Why did Oracle send the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq to 3-week lows in the markets yesterday?
You know, it's so interesting because if we look at the losses that Oracle experienced just in yesterday's session on Wednesday, we're talking $69 billion were wiped off of Oracle's market value just in one day. Now, the stock's seen massive gains, obviously. And just to remind our viewers, Oracle is one of the companies that's leading in the AI infrastructure, specifically its cloud services. Its cloud infrastructure is really important to the AI ecosystem. The reason the stock dropped yesterday was because one of its main partners in building these AI infrastructure facilities backed out from developing a new facility worth $10 billion. Blue Owl is the company that had many partnerships with Oracle, but this time it said it's not going to go forward with this particular facility. Now, that reignited worries about the massive amounts of spending, not just by Oracle, but by many companies in the AI infrastructure over just money they're spending essentially to build the infrastructure for AI, artificial intelligence. Oracle specifically, also just to remember, its fortunes are very closely tied to OpenAI. And we've talked a lot about the level of debt that OpenAI is experiencing at the moment and the very high levels of spending. And the question is, when are these companies, be it OpenAI or Oracle, going to see the return on investment from these massive amounts? And just to give a really quick example, we have an expectation by 2030, $1 trillion will be spent by OpenAI to build more infrastructure for artificial intelligence. Where is the money going to come from? How is it going to fund it? And when is all that money going to be recouped in terms of actual productivity gains? And I think that comes back to the initial question when we talk about these high valuations for Oracle and other companies investing these vast amounts. Are these valuations justified? And perhaps that explains to us why we saw those falls. Markets are more stable today, but this is definitely going to be a trend and certainly a theme we follow into 2026.
Carina, Kamel, I always learn so much from you. We didn't get to talk about the Santa rally, but hope you'll be able to join me again in the future to chat about that. Thanks so much. Yeah, definitely. Carina, great to have you on. Now, we're getting new footage of an unusual winter scene in northern Saudi Arabia. Snow has blanketed the Torjina Highlands and parts of the Tabuk region, turning the desert-framed mountains into a winter wonderland. Temperatures reportedly dropped to -4 degrees Celsius with heavy snowfall, dense fog and also strong winds. Look at those pictures, absolutely brilliant, coming out of Saudi Arabia. Now, a reminder of our top stories. EU leaders meet in Brussels to decide whether frozen Russian assets can fund Ukraine. Turning Point USA gathers in Arizona for its first big conference since Charlie Kirk's assassination. And the Bank of England cuts interest rates, easing costs for borrowers and bringing an early Christmas present to all those in the UK. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora will be coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours' time with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for watching.